we moved through the first chapter of John. Now we're moving into the second chapter of John, and we're getting into those big stories that we're pretty familiar with. And today we're going to be preaching on the wedding at Cana. Now, just quick oversight, because it'll be a few minutes before I actually read the text. This is the story of Jesus turning water into wine. It's, I think, a pretty famous story. So when I first accepted the Lord's call into ministry, I figured I would enjoy most of it. But there was one thing that I dreaded. I really didn't want to do weddings. They weren't my thing. I thought they were sappy and overly dramatic and too idealistic, and all these things. And I'm kind of not that kind of guy. So I figured, though, well, hey, I may not love them, but I'll, as part of the ministry, obviously I'll get through them, and I'll do them as often as I need to. If they're just one aspect of the I guess job, if you want to call it that. It is a job, but it's more than that. The ministry. Then if there's one aspect of ministry that I don't enjoy, I think I'm doing okay. Because I really did think I would enjoy everything else. And you know what? I was wrong. As it turned out, I love weddings. In fact, I've had a few opportunities to do weddings. I haven't done a lot, maybe I'd say less than 5, so probably 3 to 5, somewhere around in there. And I've really enjoyed doing them. They've actually elevated from that which I thought I would dread to one of my favorite things to do in ministry. In Michigan, it's a lot. I would say formal weddings seem to be more prevalent than down here. I just haven't had a lot of opportunity down here to do a wedding. I'm hoping that changes, but I enjoy so many things about it, and I like getting to know the couples. I enjoy sharing really the beauty of what God has to say about his love and how he allows us to participate in his love through marriage. It's a beautiful thing. I have often said, and I mean this, marriage is almost a sacrament. It's not, but it's close. It's we've got baptism, and we've got a communion, and marriage it's so close to sacred in that regard. It's salvifically sacred that it's almost a sacrament, but it's not. If there was something below a sacrament, whatever that level is, marriage would be there. So I think it's appropriate then that Jesus officially begins his ministry at a wedding. So here's the thing with this text, because this is the wedding at Cana. It's famous for Jesus turning water into wine, which just draws into the text or into the conversation lots of discussion about this water into wine and what it means. And so I want to read the text, but before I get to it, I really feel like we need to address some critical matters in order to get the greater understanding of what this passage is about. This passage, you see, is cited by every town drunk knows this passage, and they cite it as their favorite. That proves that it's okay to live the way they opt to live. And yet on the other end of the spectrum, you've got preachers, churches, entire ministries, and even denominations that decry abolitionism and no alcohol whatsoever. And they say, because this is difficult, how are you going to justify an abolitionist position when Jesus seems to have turned water into wine and provided it to people? Well, one of the things that oftentimes the abolitionist side of the spectrum will cite is that this was not real wine, or it wasn't alcoholic wine. They will say that, and I haven't heard it too often anymore. It seems like they've realized that this is not it's an untenable position. But I still hear it from time to time. I just did fairly recently. they say that it was basically grape juice. Jesus turned water into grape juice. It did not have alcohol in it. And I just want to clarify a couple of things. Two things, because the two spectrums of this conversation bring up 2 points of debate. First thing, just because Jesus turned water into wine does not mean that he is advocating for drunkenness and debauchery and losing your mind. The scripture tells us we are to be sober-minded. We are not to be drunk. Scripture is very, very clear on that. Simultaneously, scripture is clear that wine is good, that wine is even a gift, that alcohol is a good thing, a joy of life. Alcohol is also medicinal, and alcohol was perhaps, we've all heard that the water wasn't good and all that may be part of the case, but alcohol was prevalent throughout the ancient Near East, throughout Hebrew culture. It's been a staple of the Hebrew diet. And we're not talking again about grape juice. We're talking about alcoholic fermented wine that was capable of making you drunk. So here, how do we draw the line? Jesus turns water into wine. So we know that wine is a good thing, but we're not supposed to be drunk. Well, here's how we draw the line. The same way we draw the line with every other good thing in our lives. So we have, say, finances. Money is a good thing, right? So pursuing good financial wisdom, pursuing prosperity, pursuing making sure that we're set up for retirement and having all of our financial eggs in a basket, if you will. All that's a good thing. But there are people who take that too far and turn finances into the only thing that matters. And I know people, again, on both sides of the spectrum. I know very well-off folks who put God first in their lives and put people above money and relationships above stuff, and they've got it right. They've got, the right priorities. And it's a beautiful thing when we see it at work in such a way. And I know people on the other end of the spectrum who have lots of money, and that is the most important thing in their lives. And if you are a person, then you come below that, and sometimes God might make the top three. But does that mean we shouldn't pursue? Because there's the propensity for sin, does that mean we shouldn't pursue that which God says is a good thing? In the same way, and I'll try to keep it G-rated, but sexuality is another great example. There is so much propensity, so much opportunity for sin, but God has given us human sexuality within the confines of a loving marriage between a husband and a wife, for them to enjoy that aspect of the marriage. Just because it's possible that someone could commit adultery, or it's possible that someone could get addicted to pornography, or it's possible that someone could defile the marriage bed in some other way, doesn't mean we should abstain from enjoying that aspect of marriage. So it's the same with everything. Every good thing that God has given us, men and women have made it possible to turn into a sin. God has given us wine for a good thing, for various good things. But he's been clear, we are not to be drunk with wine. So we shouldn't remain sober. We can enjoy a glass of wine, but we need to remain sober. So it's the same with every other thing in our lives. So the town drunk that runs around citing this as his favorite verse and proof as to why he can live the way he is wrong. On the other end of the spectrum, the preachers and folks who contend that the wine that Jesus turned into, or the water that Jesus turned into wine, was grape juice. I'm trying to be as gentle as I possibly can. It's just not true. It's throughout Scripture, and I cannot even begin to go through it right here in this message. But throughout Scripture, it is so clear that the wine that is referred to in Scripture generally is alcoholic wine, and specifically in the passage at the wedding at Cana, it's alcoholic wine. There is no debate on this. There shouldn't be a debate on this. The fact that there is, it really is just people trying to put into Scripture their own preference and their own opinion. They're trying to make it say something that it does not say. Now, having said this, and I kind of brushed through that quickly because none of this is the point of this passage in Scripture. But it's so important that we just kind of clear the way. So drunkenness is a sin. However, a glass of wine is okay as long as you remain sober. All right. And this was actually alcoholic fermented wine that Jesus had created in these purification jugs. So it was this event, this wedding at Cana, occurred at. Actually, I want to go ahead and read the passage right now, and we'll move into the rest of the message. So we're going to be looking at John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Let me put on my spectacles, and we will work through this. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, and did not know where it had came from, though the servants who had drawn the water did know. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you kept the good wine until now." This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. So with that, I wanted to address, going back to what is this wine all about? Well, the wine, like I said, it is fermented alcoholic wine, but it was critical importance at a wedding. You see, though the wine was alcoholic, the importance of it is more symbolic. And so it's symbolic of several things, and I got more things than I've got here, but just for example, it symbolizes jubilee. It symbolizes joy. It symbolizes exhilaration and celebration. And certainly in the context of a wedding, all of those are aspects of a wedding. In America, we all know that the wedding is idealized and it's made to be a big deal. And for a long time, I did kind of think, it's too idealized, it's too much of a thing. But I actually don't anymore. I actually think that it should be idealized. I actually think that it should be made a big deal of. And for as much as we make it a big deal here in the modern day, the ancient Near East, or the first century Jews, they made it an epic big deal. It was a super important, in fact, it may have been for many, certainly lower economic status Jews, the most important day of their entire lives. This was the one day when what the bridegroom or the bride or the groom said was the word. It was the rule of the party, and what they said went. If they said the wine flows, the wine flowed. If they said the feast starts, the feast started. It was a moment when they got to act, in a sense, as king and queen over their own party. In fact, they even wore a crown and robes at their party. It was a super big deal. In fact, if the wine had run out at a Jewish wedding, it was possible that the couple could be sued by the guests, by one or more of the guests. So the importance of this event and the importance of the drought of wine was really a major problem. This wasn't a small hiccup in their wedding. This was a thing that would bring shame upon the newly wedded couple. And so it was a major, major deal. I want to look at verses 1 through 3 together as we work through this passage together. And we're taking this in big chunks. And look, I'm telling you right now, I'm leaving a lot on the table. There's a lot I'm not even going to address. I'm just going to, you know what I'm going to address? I'm going to look at Jesus. We're here to see who Jesus was, or to see who he is and what he does for us in our lives. So that's the path we're taking through here. I apologize if you're wanting exegesis on every line, but I could spend 3 weeks, 4 weeks in this passage, and we want to just take it. We want to take the whole thing all as one piece. So we're going to leave a lot on the table, but what we're not leaving on the table is Jesus. All right. So verses 1 through 3 together say this: On the third day there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Now, it's apparent in Scripture that Jesus loved parties. It seems that he accepted every invitation to a party he ever got, whether it was a dinner party or a wedding or everything in between. We often find Jesus in the midst or in the scene of some sort of celebration. So here he is at a wedding. And I think it is likely, although Scripture doesn't tell us specifically, but I think it's likely that he had at least an acquaintance with the couple, if not was a good friend. And certainly Mary, I believe, was acquainted with or a good friend. It could have been a family member, maybe extended family, or who knows exactly. We don't know, and that's not necessarily important. I just believe it's the case because Mary, Jesus' mother, was so dismayed when she discovers that they have ran out of wine. Now, if you're just a random guest, if you're just an extended friend, or, this is a cousin you met twice when you were kids, you're probably not going to care that much if the wine runs out. Not to this level. You're going to care because you're a guest and now you have no wine. But you're not going to care in the way that Mary cared. She was invested in this couple's shame being averted. And so Mary comes to Jesus and she says to him that the wine has run out. This is the problem. This is the major problem that we see in this passage. Mary says simply these words in verse 3, "They have no wine." Now, at the most important time of a couple's life, they ran out of wine. Now, we know, because we just talked about it, that wine symbolizes jubilee and joy and exhilaration and celebration. In essence, Mary could have said to Jesus, "They have no joy. They ran out of joy." Anyone who understands the desire for an ideal wedding understands that this is going to be a bad situation if it's not remedied. But while this situation is in the context of a wedding in the first century, it's actually a picture of humanity. You see, in humanity, until Christ intervenes in our lives, we remain in the shame of sin and we lack joy. We are born seeking the good wine of life. Now, I'm using wine as an analogy for all the good things that we experience in this world. That is to say that wine is that which is good. Wine is good stuff. And so whether it be an adventure that we're seeking, or we're born pursuing love, or born pursuing success, or simply a good time, we pursue the stuff of life with vigor. But the dilemma remains that no matter how much of the wine of life we drink, no matter how much success or fun or adventure we have, eventually we run out of wine. Eventually we run out of joy. It happens at different times for each of us. You see, some of us, we might live a rough life, a hard life, and not come to the end of our rope when we bend our knee to Christ until way into our after age and has had its way with us and health has left us, and all we have is memories of the good stuff. And we lay there broken and beaten, shells of our former selves. Maybe that's some of our story. Maybe somebody who's listening, their story is a little different. Maybe God got a hold of you in college or maybe in high school. It doesn't matter, because wherever we are everyone is unique. Every story is unique. Your story is truly your story. Throughout time, the same problem has plagued all people. We all look for the joy of life, and the problem exists for sure. But we don't find it. We don't find this joy in success and fame and fun and all of these things. We find this joy only in one place. So we're gonna read verses 4 through 9 together now. And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. And when the master of the feast tasted, the water had now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom. Now Jesus tells Mary about the problem of they have no wine. And I love the exchange between Jesus and his mother. He calls his mother woman. He says in verse 4, "Woman, what does this have to do with me?" And this is the very reason that I refer to my mother the same way. I call her woman as well. And you know, you might think it's harsh, but I'm just trying to be more like Jesus. So Jesus objects to his mother's request for help, but her reaction is classic. It would be pretty much the same reaction as my mother. She totally ignores him. She totally ignores his objection, and she says to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And we see this in verse 5. His mother says to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." It's like, talk to the hand. And it's funny because, to my knowledge, this is the only debate that in Scripture that Jesus didn't win. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Mary won this one. So we got Mary 1, Jesus 0 up to this point in the book of John. So having lost the debate with his mother, Jesus did with it what any good son would do, and he found a solution to her liking, of course. Verses 6 through 9 tell us the details of how he performed this miracle, having the servants fill these water jars with water, and there's purification jars with water, and then take some out and bring it into the master of the feast. This is the series of events that lead up to Jesus performing this miracle. The interesting fact is that the only people who knew that Jesus turned the water into wine were his disciples and these servants. You see, Jesus performed this miracle for them. He performed this miracle so that they would believe, so that they would have faith, so that they would see just a glimpse of who he is and what he's about. Jesus does the same thing for us. You see, his salvation is available to all, but the story of how he eliminates our sin shame and replaces our sin shame with hope and joy is truly unique to each one of us. It's our story. My story and your story, as unique as they are jewels from God. He gave them to us so that we could remember his work in our lives. You see, I can look back on my life and I can recognize the faithfulness, the salvation of God at work in my life, and through the various circumstances that he worked through. you didn't have, your story isn't the same. And so you can recognize your story. You can recognize God in your story in different ways, whether it's maybe you found God in the midst of a health crisis and you can see him as a healer more than I might have in my salvation story. It's unique to each and every one of us, and it belongs to us, and it's part of our testimony. And the testimony that we have, we are to share with others. It's an important aspect of our faith. Now, I want to mention quickly these purification urns. You see, these urns were used for purification, and I find it interesting that they were old law purification urns. They were what they would have used in Old Testament times. Of course, they still are Old Testament times in this passage, but I'm using that language for us. You see, Jesus is in a sense symbolically saying the Old Testament purification is no longer what will be used. We are now in the new wine period. He fills the old purification urns with new wine, symbolically changing the storyline from ritual and law to grace and mercy. Verses 10 through 11 say something I really enjoy. We'll read them together. And the master of the ceremony said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now there's two things about this wine. First, this wine was approximately, when we add up all the gallons of these jars, was approximately 180 gallons worth of good wine. I haven't bought wine in a long time, so I don't know what, I knew it wasn't cheap back then, so I'm sure it isn't going down. What this basically means, and I think scholars were right on this, not only did Jesus solve the wedding shame dilemma that they would have had if they had continued to be out of wine, but Jesus likely provided a substantial monetary gift to the couple should they opt to sell this wine after their wedding. This was more than enough wine for the wedding. This was overflowing and abundant amounts of wine. And so if they had opted to sell this good premium wine, then they could have had a significant monetary benefit from that as well. And I just think that's an interesting little kind of nugget to kind of think about it as we move through the second point. And the second point is that Jesus saved the best wine for last. And the same is true for us, of course. You see, we enjoy the wine of joy in this life, but we won't fully know the true full experience of joy and jubilee and exhilaration and celebration of the wine that Jesus offers until the end, when we are with him in glory. You see, there is a passage in Revelation chapter 19, verse 9. It's the wedding supper of the Lamb. And I want to read it to you real quick. Revelation chapter 19, verse 9 says this. "And the angel said to me, write this, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, these are the true words of God." In the great and final wedding, when we're all together in glory, the wine will not run out. In fact, there will be enough wine to last for an eternity.